Here we are. Sensible things again. No more jokes. And next, first, just to make sure that we do at least do the three of them. That is, whenever I come into anyone's company, may I regard myself less than anyone else. And from the depths of my heart, value others more highly than I do myself. Again, these verses are of immeasurable depth. I mean, one could explore them, each of them almost limitlessly. So to sort of stack them up a little bit, one way to approach it is that our competitive nature is in fact to our own detriment, in the sense that it makes us highly uncomfortable. And to be constantly competing with everyone else seems to make sense. But from the perspective of one's mental happiness, it is terrible. It always reminds me, like, I know actually his name for a change. I think the name of the person might be Robert Wright, if I'm not mistaken. American psychologist and Buddhist practitioner that at one point gave a series of courses on what at that time was called Coursera. I think it's nowadays called differently. Like a free platform for academic courses. And he gave an interesting argument where he says the purpose of biology is to have us procreate, but not for us to be happy. And the purpose of the Dharma is the inverse. It is not for us to procreate, but it is for us to become happy. And I always say that I'm a prime example because I did not procreate. I was very bad at that, but I'm quite happy. And so, the competitive attitude, of course, is the fight for, especially, well, on the one hand, of course, the scarce resources that we have, but above all, it's our being impelled to produce more of us out of ourselves. But at the same time, our competitive attitude makes us mentally very uncomfortable. It causes us to constantly reflect if we are better than others, or what stories to tell, or what to do. I mean, our whole social media evolve around that thing, and any research will show you that it makes our children especially very, very unhappy. That competitive nature is profoundly unhealthy. It might cause you to procreate better than someone else. If your name is Elon Musk, it seems that he's done his best, but it does not produce mental happiness. In fact, it is quite detrimental to our mental health. And so what he is saying here is that what he's saying here could be easily understood not to experience yourself really as inherently less than everyone else, but to say, well, you could just ditch this whole competitiveness. And if other people want to be more important than you, then let them be. And you have the freedom to not engage with that competitive game that we all play. So let people take the place that they seek and be at ease yourself. Because if you're no one, there's nothing to defend. There's nothing to live up to. There's no reputation to maintain. There's no status to maintain. You are free. You can do and be whatever you want. You're free to make mistakes, for example, because if you have a reputation to live up to, then you don't have that freedom anymore. To do then something silly for a change, or to try something new, becomes difficult. I have someone in my environment that always says, well, I'm always right. And I always think, yeah, you're always right, because you never try to take a challenging standpoint. So you only defend the standpoints of which you were pretty sure to begin with, because you don't dare to venture into another opinion for a change. And then maybe you fail, but it's nice to explore with someone. I mean, that's not a rewarding life to live, because then you end up listening always to your own opinions. That's pretty boring. And so if you want to venture into new territory, then sometimes you need to have a conversation with someone in which you don't know if your opinion actually holds. Maybe it doesn't. In both cases, you learn something. Maybe it does hold. Good on you. Maybe it doesn't. But you can only do that when it doesn't matter. When you want to gain a piece of understanding. And so you do that by debating or discussing with someone is often a very good way to gain new understanding. And so that's on the surface level what he is saying. Like, let everyone take their place. If you don't engage with that game, you are free to be and to do whatever you need to and want to. And you don't have the burden of having to live up to a reputation or losing it. If you don't have something, you can't lose it either. For a bodhisattva, this is also very important because sometimes you will feel compelled to do something by which you will lose your reputation. In some cases, the benefit of a person is more important than your reputation. But if you have a competitive nature, then you can't do that. You're not free to enact the welfare of all living beings in the way in that moment is really necessary. And so that's another way of thinking at it. The third way of thinking at it is that we all actually talked about over our coffee, is that these competitive relationships are also all possessive relationships. We utilize others to prop up ourselves. To be superior only makes sense when others are inferior. So we use others to prop ourselves up, which is pretty ugly. But it also creates a world that looks pretty, it makes things tasteless. It makes everything quite ugly. The opposite side of it, especially when we understand it on the basis of the first verse, is that to look into the world with a perspective of gratitude, in which everyone in some way contributes to who you are, is a much more beautiful and skillful way of looking at it as well. And so to see everyone as contributors to your being, at the beginning can feel uncomfortable. But it's really a beautiful way to navigate the world. That world that you then wake up to is magnificent. But of course, underlying this is something else. That is that according to the Buddha, we have no essence, we have no soul. We are simply dependent originations like all things. And we depend on parts, we depend on causes and conditions, and we depend on imputation. And so when we engage in a competitive process, we end up, by definition, grasping at itself. We grasp at an essence. We say there is something about me that inherently is better than someone else. And so our competitive nature also fetters us to our own ignorance, as does self-cherishing to begin with. So we go round in circles. And we have a problem and we attach to our problem. I am like that. I am better than you. And it says that is ultimately very badly to your detriment. The other problems are surface level problems, but underneath something much worse is going on. In your competitive attitude, you end up, you're tying yourself to your own poison. Because every time you posit that someone is something in relation to you, you also posit implicitly that you are also in that way. You posit that you inherently exist in some way or another. Yeah.
Is it okay to have bias?
The question is it okay to have a bias? Well, unless we're Buddhas, according to this tradition, only Buddhas don't have biases and arhats, and the rest of us do. So bias is in that sense unskillful, in the sense of a bias of someone being like that. And so if we hold that someone has a characteristic independently, that's what bias is according to the Buddha, that would be pretty unhealthy. To be practical in the sense that some people display unskillful behavior, that of course is necessary. But people are not like that. And we, as I said in the first session, that we make the unfortunate switch from someone behaving in unfortunate ways in certain circumstances to people being bad or being in one way or another. And that is not true. Because according to this tradition, nothing has inherent characteristics. So nothing is known by its own characteristics. Nothing has own characteristics. So there's no basis for any bias in reality at all. But something does not have individual or inherent characteristics, by which are you going to judge it to be different from something else? Nothing. Okay, and you could, I know the question is to repeat it for those on Zoom. Could you hear this question on Zoom? No. Okay, then I should repeat it. So would there be a reason to posit one culture to be superior to another culture, for example? And the idea would be that would be a pretty bad idea. Yeah. Some things are more skillful, but that is not an inherent superiority. Let's say, if I want to be happy, I could say that meditating is superior over drinking alcohol. But that is not a bias. That is simply an observation of the outcome. If I drink alcohol, I destroy my brain cells, and tomorrow morning I have a headache. That is, well, when I meditate, my brain cells flourish, and tomorrow morning I wake up with a very happy mind because I slept well. So the outcome is superior. That's not a bias. It is simply an observation. But even that is very complicated. And so what is beneficial, in this case, is quite black and white. In some cases, what is good for one person is not necessarily good for another person. That is why, even within the context of the Buddhist tradition, we have many different what is called schools. And the Buddha taught these different schools for different individuals. So we said slightly different things to different individuals because they need different things at different times. Also to give them some tools. For example, this was held here with regard to Madhyamika. As some people cannot hold Madhyamika. For them, it's detrimental. So in that case, that is what you don't teach them. You were talking about the Bodhisattva vows. That is one of the Bodhisattva vows, not to teach emptiness to those that are not ready to understand it, because it undermines everything. So in some cases, what is skillful and what is not that easy to say. It depends. But if a bias is on the basis of it, something having its own characteristics, then this tradition would definitely deny the utility of that. Make sense? And so you navigate the world by seeing what is skillful, not by means of characteristics that a thing has in and of itself. Because for this tradition, it's very important that all things only have characteristics in relationship to something else. Nothing has characteristics. Nothing is established by way of its own characteristics. All things are empty of existing in that way. All things are only something in relation to something else. So then there's no essential basis for making a distinction between one thing and another thing. There's only relational effects. But that's a challenging proposition. Yeah. Now, there's one more thing to consider here from the Bodhisattva's perspective. And when we take that example that the statement that I used earlier, that we have our untrained mind utilizes others for its own purposes, for its own application. So desire and attachment are forms of wishing to utilize someone to get something, and anger is the consequence when we perceive that someone or something is in our way of that utilization, that pursuit. And here, in a way, one could say, and that is another deep way of looking at it, it's inversing this utilization. But that's saying, like, rather than others are the object for me to be used, is to say, by way of the existence of others, will I achieve my awakening. So rather than object of utilization, to see others as an essential source of your well-being. And that's, of course, a profoundly different attitude than an attitude of utilization. And so in that sense, they are the givers of your awakening. And in that sense, in that capacity, they are superior to anything else. So these are some of the things to think of. Maybe one more thing to add is that, and that's quite a practical one for a Bodhisattva practitioner, is that as you all know, it is easy to forget that you were on this path to begin with. The perception that we have is always based on value. We don't see the world as it is. This is a perception by which our mind tries to say something about the value of the things that we observe. And this is a very self-centered, egocentric, consumerist perspective in our case. And so if we want our intent to behave differently, to pursue enlightenment, we must transform our perceptions. Our perceptions must contain clues for our intent to follow. And so to see all living beings as our mothers, as being of incredible value, as being the source of our awakening, to train on that so that they start to appear to us like that, is very useful in reminding us of our pursuit. Then the world around us becomes full of clues that remind us what we are doing. So it is also very practical in that sense. And so much of Buddhist practice is the re-endowing of reality with new value. And to realize that our mind is already imputing value all the time, but in a very unfortunate way, something that is contrary to my pursuit. And when you just start training, the world still looks full of desire objects and aversion objects. And the Buddha says that is to your own detriment. And thereby you end up like swimming against the stream, because all your perceptions tell you the opposite of what you're pursuing. So it makes it very hard. Now, when you want time to meditate, but all things around you look attractive, when you're sitting in your room and you have your Netflix and your music and whatever you have, you're surrounded by things that attract your attention. How are you going to meditate? And you are fighting with your own perceptions. That is an intellectual wanting of one thing, and there's a perception of something that is quite contrary to it. And so the final aspect that he highlights here is that if we want to have the freedom to pursue our spiritual aims, then we must realize that the way the world appears to us is of our own making. The value that we see in things comes from our side, not from the side of the object. And so by training and seeing all beings as infinitely valuable, you recreate over time your own perceptions in the image of your real pursuit. And so your perceptions then become a mirror of your spiritual pursuit. And they are your dear mother sentient beings for whom you seek awakening, but they're also the sources by which you will attain it. When the world appears to you in that way, of course, practice is easy, because everything in your environment reminds you of your practice. That, of course, takes center stage in tantric practice. In tantric practice, we transform everything. And we have an active engagement with the world as though that is a pure land in which we pursue awakening. And this is such an important thing for a meditator to understand, because most of us try, after all, even though we know it doesn't work, to practice on the basis of willpower. But we have our intent is not self. So you can't will your intent. That makes no sense, even in a philosophical way. You can only recondition. And so by seeing all beings as incredibly, as invaluable, by training in that way so that they appear to you in that way, then you create a good basis for consistent, intentional pursuit of awakening. That is the way to do that. That makes sense? Also realize that, as I say, often the transformational path of the here we are. Habit is the path of seeing and not the path of doing. The Buddha highlights that by transforming what we see, the behavior of our intent changes, and not the other way around. There's no such thing as free will. Our intent is a conditioned phenomenon, like all things. What is conditioned by? By our perceptions. So what do we try to transform? Our perceptions. And that is what the path of seeing does foundationally. When we have a path of seeing, it starts to transform everything into an appearance of empty phenomenon. And then our intent is rightly guided, because then we provide our intent with the right information, finally. Yes.
Just how it reads, that verse, and then another practice of tongue down around it. Does it read deliberately confrontational?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And,
It tries to, it should hurt.
so
Yeah.
so it brings up this inherent sense of self-importance.
Yes. The text has.
And inverse.
Yes, exactly.
But that does too. It does it in kind of modern context, psychologically. You can engage with that dissonance, or you can deny that dissonance and pretend, or like, so it brings up this intrinsic eye. So you're like, okay, see.
Let's keep it short, because I need to restate all of this.
Sorry. So it brings up the intrinsic distance. So you can engage with it or deny it. So how do you work with the denial that has people acting as if everyone are more important than them, but there's a strong sense of self-negation?
Let's see how I answer this in such a way that it makes sense to the listeners. So the text, and that many of the Kadampa texts do, is, how should I say this? Well, you let us use your word, confrontational. They choose language that is uncomfortable for good reason. Yeah. Because it says here, less than everyone else, which is understood by us as in an inherently less way. Yeah. And of course he does that because he wants to show, like when you read the sentence, it hurts, doesn't it? It hurts because of you. Because my words don't do anything in and of themselves. Why does your mind resist being less than everyone else? Because you take it that I am of less value than everyone else. I am inherently less than everyone else. So the sentence itself is nicely tempting to show us that it is a painful sentence because of us. Because of when someone has realized emptiness, the sentence doesn't matter, unless in what way. Of course, the good point is that there's two ways to misunderstand it. Martin, the director of the center the former director of the center in Holland, now Norbu, always tells a story at one point of a nun that misunderstood this completely. That went to the center and came out late in the day, and he went up to her and he says, can we make you some lunch, because I don't think you have eaten yet? And that person said, yeah, well, if it's a piece of bread, it's quite okay as well. And if it's a bit molded, I don't mind either. Yeah. And that on the one hand can be really a bad sense of self. Like I am inherently worse than everyone else. I sort of self-flagellation type of thing, which would be a wrong understanding. Or it could be a form of pride as well. See how superior I am, that I can even live on a piece of stale bread. And of course, what he means here is neither. What he means here is that you can position yourself anywhere where you want, because you know yourself not to have any inherent characteristic at all. It takes, and that's what I said. It's the training is for people that have generated bodhicitta. In other words, this is training for people with profoundly powerful minds. This cannot be done by children. I have to stand in the middle and to think everyone else is superior to me takes enormous mental power, enormous mental courage. So that's important indeed to understand. Yeah. A good way to approach it is, and that again for a meditator is very important, is that all our I am stories are wrong by, as you know, by its very definition, because there's nothing that you can say in that way about anything at all. All things become in the midst of cause and conditions and so on and so forth. All things are in flux. So every I am statement by definition is wrong, and therefore is a bad manual to our own self-prediction. But when you understand yourself as a conditioned being, then you gradually over time develop a much better predictive model of yourself than an I am story. Because an I am story, no one can ever live up to. You might be intelligent in one context, but not intelligent in another context. You might be functioning well and alert in one moment of the day, and you might be pretty dull and not functioning that well in another moment of the day. So when you say I am, then you always end up with defeating your I am story. You always find contradictory moments. But when you see yourself as a process, a conditioned process, then you start to understand, well, in certain moments of the day, with these conditions, I function that way. And under other circumstances, with other conditions, I function in a very different way. That is a much better predictive model of oneself as the I am state. And so once you see yourself in that way as a conditioned process, you end up with a much more profound sense of self-courage and I don't like the word esteem, self-confidence, than with any self-esteem can ever provide you with. Because all self-esteem is now I am story. And that is self-defeating by its very nature. But when you have that self-confidence, it doesn't require you to be superior or to be inferior. You know that this makes no sense to begin with. But what you do in this case for the Bodhisattva is to elevate everyone by saying these are important. These are the most important things in my life. That's what he wants to say. Because when I see all living beings as infinitely important, I will pursue their well-being. And the only way to pursue their well-being is becoming a Buddha. That is the healthiest way of being in the world. That provides you with a predictive model of yourself, to say the modern terms, that is really useful. That is a good way of looking at yourself, helpful of navigating the world as you encounter it. It will do everything that you want it to do. Then to continue, oh wow, another verse. I'm outdoing myself. Wow. Entire 50 minutes. Yeah, of course.
That's first I'm seeing something like that. But how do we do that practice? If someone's in a situation where they like a manager, who they have an issue with or problems with, and in their opinion, the manager makes judgment bad areas, that affects how that person works. And yes, this it's around once. Is that when you feel you'd be better in that place or work better with?
So the question here is like, how do you do this in a practical way? Like, for example, in a corporation, when you have superior that functions inferior. Well,
Let's face it.
we could talk about it endlessly, and this will be an interesting topic for and one of the courses on our new library, actually. I will give you maybe an example. At one point I worked for I shall leave it in the middle so that no one can attack that person either. At one point I worked for a middle large company. I just started there. And I had a senior in my department that functioned badly. At one point, that person was attacked for his functioning, but as I could see, in an unwholesome way. That was disrespectful. So you definitely should, when you were working in a company and someone is not functioning, you definitely should do something about it. But I thought that what they did to him diminished him. You really harm someone. That was being attempted. And what I did is that I defended him. So I defended my badly functioning colleague, saying, like, what you do is not human. You can't do that to a person. And so it was by my protecting him and by me trying to prop him up that, in fact, I became the superior in the end. I became the head of that entire part of the company. And so I find that if you attack someone as being inferior to you, you posit yourself in a pretty ugly way. You tear someone down, rather than seeing that person is not functioning because of cause and condition. And when you then gain that function, let's say that you actually manage, everyone else has seen what you did, and they will try to do the same thing to you as well. I once worked for such a company. Everyone was always attacking everyone. That was a marketing company. I always say, like, I already was in hell. It was a marketing company. Everyone was always trying to tear everyone down. And I never wanted to work that way. That is self-defeating. You end up maybe in a higher position, but you're always afraid of your own position because you need to endlessly defend. And I think it's better to find the more, in that sense, it's a bad word, but the moral high ground. And so in the other company, I found a moral high ground, not by crawling over the neck of my not so well-functioning superior, but by propping him up. It was in my defense of him that I was in the end made the head of that part of the company. But also everyone had seen how I managed to do that. So everyone felt safe with me. So I ended up with a whole bunch of people working for me that felt safe because they knew I would defend them at all costs, even at my own cost. And I was also appreciated by my own boss for having done that, because he thought that is a reliable department manager. He's a person that will stand for his own people. And such a person will manage, because that's the way, when you have a department that needs to produce something, which was the case. People will really produce well when they feel careful. When people feel held and appreciated, they will do everything for you. And I had my department working 20 hours in a row for me when it was necessary. And they did that because they knew I would stand for them. And that they knew that because I had done that. And so the trick is here is not to, when he says inferior, is to see like this person, even that person is precious to me. And that the strange thing is that when you try to serve what you see, then you by that is the whole magic of this bodhisattva path. By elevating everyone, you end up by sheer by effect be elevated above everyone else. And we have a beautiful sutra called the Diamond Sutra, which says, a bodhisattva that sees himself as a bodhisattva is not a bodhisattva at all. The bodhisattva doesn't think like I'm superior, but he will be, or she, because she benefits everyone. But in her head, there's no thought, I am superior to everyone, because people that think that can't do that.
I'm in a fortunate position that person. But it did affect my self-esteem.
Yeah.
Very.
Maybe to elaborate on a little bit, because you highlighted it. What I find very interesting is there's a beautiful text by the Master Sangha, Maitreya Sangha, Mahāyāna Sutra Alamkara. One of the texts that someone should teach. Maybe I will. So one of them is a magnificent inspirational text. It really, rather than focusing on the technical aspects, it focuses on how beautiful the Bodhisattva really is. In that text, you have an argument with regard to leadership. What does leadership for a Bodhisattva look like? Like how, when you want to bring others to awakening, how do you do that? And he highlights, well, And it's a complex argument, but he says there's three ways in which you can take leadership. The first one is like a king. And so in some cases, you need to know where you go. In some cases, you need to say, now we go there. Listen to me. There's circumstances, and like when a fire breaks out in a building, then a discussion group over where to run to is not optional. Then you take leadership. Then you're the king. You know where to go. You tell everyone you go there, and you take that authority. You have cultivated that authority. So there's space for that. There are other circumstances in what the Bodhisattva takes what they call the ferryman leadership. You walk with someone. You are someone's best friend. You don't tell them what to do by friendship. Show them the way. You make yourself relatable to the other. That's all. That's another one. And the third one is the shepherd, in which you coach other people to find their own way. You give them, and I like that. I think that's the Bodhisattva needs to be able to do all three. The third one is beautiful in the sense that to give people the feeling as though they accomplished it themselves. You coach them in such a way that they don't realize that you're doing it. Because in the end, what you want them is to feel empowered. And maybe that superiority you felt disempowered. Maybe the whole point was to make that person feel empowered. And because one of the gravest things that we all struggle with is that endless competitiveness makes us all feel unacknowledged. How rare is it that people really says, I value what you do. Not because I want something from you, but I just like what you do. It's almost never the case because we use each other. When I say that to you in a company, you quickly have the feeling, and what do you want from it? Why are you telling me that? And we all have that feeling. And when someone comes to you and praises you, you think like, yeah, what's next? What do you want from me? And that sense of endowing someone with personhood just because as a gift, like I don't want anything from you in return. It's important to me that you have that self-reliance. That's the greatest self-gift that we can give to others. And so sometimes the superior needs to say the superior, but what the superior needs is someone that gives him that confidence. That person's maybe misfiring because that person feels fragile and attacked and can't sleep. Say, I'm here for you. I value what you do. Tell me what I can do to to support you in what you're doing. I would like to help you succeed. To give that person the sense that he or she was always capable of doing it. It is said that the third one is the rapid way to our own awakening. Yeah. In reality, I would say a practitioner needs to be able to do all three. It depends on the individual. And that you see beautiful in the sutras. The Buddha sometimes is a king, most often actually a ferryman, sometimes a shepherd. The Buddha actually rarely does the king one. That's a bit of the later tradition. You can see that Buddhism got interpreted in different cultural circumstances. And so the later tradition takes the empire of when King Ashoka conquers India, it becomes an empire. But the Buddha does not grow up in an empire. The Buddha grows up actually we call it as a kingdom, but it is actually a tribal republic. In this tribal republic, his father is not a king, but is the first amongst equals. Famous inter. And you see the Buddha exactly being that in his own community. There's a famous sutra of the monks of Kosambi where a fight breaks out in the community around the question if someone broke the monastic rules or not. And interestingly enough, you would expect the Buddha just to go up and say, well, I made the rules. I will tell you what happened here. And he doesn't. He goes to both parties and say, please give up the arguing. He counsels both parties. He does not tell them whether or not that person broke the rules or not. He does not tell which party is right. He advises both parties to quit arguing with each other. stop fighting. And they don't. They tell him, mind your own business. And he walks away. He disappears. One morning, they find him no longer there. When they go on the begging round, the Buddha's gone. The Buddha was already miles away, somewhere else in the forest. And then what he does is that he makes them look for him. Because they know without him, they're no longer a community, they need him. So they need the shepherd. And they go and look for the shepherd. And it is by making them look for him that he heals his community, not by telling them what to do. This is interesting. And I find it interesting because, we like that king thing, but that's the imposition of power. But the imposition of power is self-defeating. When you do it too often, and I think this is often the problem that we talked about in the past with the guru relationship. When there's authority only, you diminish this disciple. When it's the only position that a guru takes, then you end up with students that just follow whatever you do, but it's nothing coming from their own side. And so the Buddha would have governed his community would have collapsed after his passing, because it would have been completely dependent, symbiotically dependent on his leadership. And he didn't want to. And Thich Nhat Hanh, by the way, we have a Thich Nhat Hanh disciple here on the screen. And Thich Nhat Hanh did the same thing. Thich Nhat Hanh stepped away from the monastic. In the monastic community, it's the fully ordained ones that make the decision. They must unanimously make the decision. And Thich Nhat Hanh stepped away from that community. He says, you need to learn to make decisions. Only when you can't figure out what to do, I might counsel you. But I'm not the decision maker. You are. And the Buddha did the same thing. He empowered others to find self-confidence. And that is the greatest form of leadership. And that you can only do and that's the weird but the thing of it, that you can only do when you know that you have no inherent existence. Because then you're free. Because when you know one, what is that to compare to? Then you're completely free to choose skillful activities. But you're not, you have taken yourself out of the play. And I promised Adam to stop on time, because if he was going to say something important, and I fully agree with that. You need to speak loudly, because then the people on Zoom hear it as well. Yeah, you need to take leadership, Mr. Adam.
So yesterday we finished the 5-year basic program, and Genla received some wonderful offerings, which is entirely appropriate. But we sort of overlooked Chrissy, who orchestrated all of this, and that hard work and effort should not be overlooked. And these are from your students.
Thank you very much. Okay. I've done it without all of you either. It takes all of us to make it happen, doesn't it? Yes, sir.
So, Christy, thank you very much for organizing the basic program for the past 5 years. And I've seen you in many different functions along this line. I would say this went well. Struggling with the forum, for example, another thing. And to take a bit broader, because Mario Dili is also sitting here, and all the other people behind the screens, Carrie, John, for example. It took many people. It was a joke. It takes a lot of people, a lot of work to have me talk about, to have me just talk all day long. And we started, what year did we start this? We started in the middle of the COVID. We started just before the COVID.
21.
Yeah. And for one thing, it is challenging to organize a center, especially a massive operation like this one. And the times were difficult in which you did that. But we And this was not an easy path to walk. And that after 5 years, the center is still flourishing, still open, dependent on the shoulders of actually very few, surprisingly few. That is definitely to be celebrated and much appreciated and by all your students. So may you continue for a while. I know I'm asking challenging things now. May the center flourish. And of course, you have a good teacher for the next basic program that is hiding in this room, which is fair enough. You will start in March, wasn't it, for the next basic program? March is the date for the next basic program.
The next one, yeah. It's still just being finished off the planning stage.
That's a great job. And some of you still have to do the review, yeah. Yeah, not done yet with the blood, sweat, and tears, isn't it? Yeah. It's not that bad.
I almost finished it. It's been pretty intense.
No, it's not. Easy. Easy. Like it's easy to have lunch. Very easy. I would suggest that we come back here 2:15 so that we have a bit of decent time for lunch. I'm not sure how lunch is happening, but
So we compare the whole. Sunday morning midday, just give us a couple of minutes, get the food out and then you go abroad some food. Chat.
so
Okay.
online, I see you 2:15. See if I can finish the text. Just kidding. Let's give my computer some peace.